So when trying to understand any kind of data, one of the most common functions that you're going to be using is filter function. And what filter lets you do is to be able to reduce your data based upon certain set of conditions. It could just be one condition or it could be multiple conditions. But the idea is to let us look at our data on a more subset basis, so a smaller reduced data set instead of the full data set. And we'll be looking at a few different examples of that. So currently I am on the dplyr page, and part of dplyr is a filter function which we'll be using to create a subset of our data. And you can go ahead and read this in a little bit more detail, but I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. And the idea is that we can use some of these useful filter functions here to basically subset our data. And I'll be providing a few different examples. Also, as I said previously, we have this in the cheat sheet that is part of dplyr, so the filter function is right here. But rather than just reading about it, let's see if we can look at a few different examples of it, and that will give us a better understanding of how to do this. So I currently have the data which we saw previously, and let's just say that I pipe that into the filter function, and we can take a look at something like if I filter the neighborhood group, and we're going to set it equal to Brooklyn. Now what we're doing is basically filtering our data where the neighborhood group is Brooklyn, and you can see that the number of rows has been reduced to about 20,000 out of the 49,000 or so rows that we have. Now to check whether something is, or basically to be able to say that the neighborhood group is equal to Brooklyn, we have to use these double equals instead of a single equal, because a single equal implies that we're assigning a variable. So here we're not assigning a variable, we are searching for all of the Brooklyn instances within the neighborhood group. So that's a pretty simple example. We can do a couple of interesting examples, such as, let's say that we have our data and we want to filter for where the neighborhood group is Brooklyn and the neighborhood is something like Kensington or Clinton Hill. So let's see how we would go about doing that. So if I just pipe the data into a filter function, and then here I specify that the neighborhood group is Brooklyn and the neighborhood is going to be Kensington. So now we can see that our data has been reduced quite a bit. So there are only 175 rows of our data where the neighborhood group is Brooklyn and the neighborhood is Kensington. So that's pretty interesting. Now here I used a comma, but we could also use an ampersand sign. So either works when we are trying to use basically an AND condition. So here I'm going to type this comment that it's an AND condition. And if I just run this again, you'll see that's the same thing. We could also need to do something like an OR condition. So let me type that out here. And basically, I'm going to repeat pretty much the same thing. But in this case, what I'm going to show is, let's say that the neighborhood could either be Kensington or it could be Clinton Hill. So that's a good use case for using the OR condition. And to be able to do that, all I have to do is just write out the neighborhood, which could be either Kensington. And then to do an OR operation, I just have to use this pipe symbol. And here I can just use neighborhood, and it's going to be either Kensington or I'm going to try Clinton Hill. So let's see how many rows we get. So we get about 747 rows, and we can see that we have both Kensington and Clinton Hill as part of our data set. So that's a useful case. Now let's say you want to use both AND and OR conditions together. Let me provide an example of that. So here I'm just going to say AND as well as OR. So similar process as last time. We're going to specify that the neighborhood group is equal to Brooklyn. And here, let's say that the neighborhood could be either, and I'm just going to go ahead and just copy neighborhood because I don't want to type that out multiple times. So the neighborhood could be Clinton Hill. it could be Kensington, or it could be Fort Greene, let's say. So now we have about 1,236 rows, and we can see that our neighborhood group is always Brooklyn, and then we see all three instances of the neighborhoods. So this is an example of a case when you would use both and or. We, of course, could have just stuck with keeping just this or condition and not needing the neighborhood group being Brooklyn, but I just wanted to provide a quick example. We could also check for conditions such as greater than, less than, or equal to. So let's check out a couple of examples of that. And perhaps one good column to check that out would be the price column. So let's say that we want to search for all apartments which have a price of less than 100. We could do that by, here I'm going to say less than, and just like last time, filter the data based upon the price column. And anything which is less than or equal to 100. So let's see how many rows do we get. So about half of the listings here are have a night price of 100 or less. Let's say we also want to take control of the number of reviews. So basically we want to have anything which has less than 100 price, and then the number of reviews has to be greater than 200. Let's try that out. So now we have about 354 listings, and basically all of these apartments have a price less than 100 and number of reviews greater than 200. You could also, instead of writing it out as a static number here, we could have also assigned it to a variable. So let me just say here that listing price is going to be 200 instead of 100, and here I can just replace this by the listing price. So let me just run this first, and then once I run this, now we can see that we have a slightly bigger data set, and it includes apartments which have a price of 200 or less and a number of reviews greater than 200. Of course, you could have used other things like the number of reviews being equal to 200. Not exactly sure if such an example exists. Looks like it does. So now you can see that all of these have exactly 200 reviews. So this is an equal to type condition. We could also do things like using other functions. So at the moment we haven't used too many of these functions, but let's say that we want to search for all apartments or listings which have a price greater than the average price or less than the average price. We could do that by basically piping our data into the filter function, and then we can do that. The price is going to be less than, or it could be equal to, the average price. So to find the average, we can just use the mean, and then here there's a couple of ways we could do that. So I could basically just go ahead and select my price column using this data $price. So what this does is just selects the vector of price within the data that we have. And if I just go ahead and run this, we can see that these are all the apartments which have a price of less than or equal to the average price. So there's quite a few of those. Couple of other ones that I use all the time. So we saw previously that the name column had a few missing values. So how could we filter for those ones? Well, here I'm going to say that the data, and I'm going to filter this based upon is.NA. So as I showed on the previous page we were on, if I just select here, we want to search for missing values within the name column. Now we can see that all of these have those NA values, which are basically the missing values. So that's how you would use the is.NA with the filter function. Another interesting one is to use between. So let's say that we want to search for all apartments which have the price that is between 500 and 1,000. For some reason, we're interested in expensive listings. So there are about 996 of these. And if I just go a little bit to the right, here we can see them. So this is a pretty useful function. I use it all of the time, and we're going to be using filter function quite a bit in some of the future videos as well. So just make sure to get really familiar with it, and we'll get some more examples of it. I should just specify that when I was using this between, I piped the price, and then what between lets us do is to specify a lower limit, which is the left, and then an upper limit, which is the right. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, thank you for joining me.